Ordinance 2017-85, an ordinance accepting and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
I would move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2017-085 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Klein. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council say aye after name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Monday?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Watson?
Aye.
Mr. Wopser?
Nay.
Ms. Frishy?
Nay.
Mr. Harrington?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Klein?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and this ordinance will be given its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2017-85, ordinance 2017-85.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2017-85.
Second, Mr. Schindeldecker. Discussion. Ms. Frishy.
I'm just curious why we're suspending the rules when appropriations was supposed to get further information, and I know I don't have it on my desk.
Mr. Mundy.
As chairman of appropriations, I seem to recall that they would go back to appropriations unless we got the further information tonight. And we had in excess of a half hour of any unlimited questions to both our representatives of the company and to our city engineer. I believe that we got sufficient information. I would not probably put this back on the appropriations. We can beat this horse to death if we want to, but you had ample opportunity to ask every question you wanted to ask. You asked a dozen of them. So what?
Can I rebut you yet?
I don't care. It's up to the president. That's how we work.
Mr. Russell.
Yes, I specifically asked for it to be given its second and third reading, and so we could give it consideration tonight. What changed my view on this was when I asked Mr. Kent what his timeline was on the development. He said a week from Friday he would be to the point where, or his crews would be to the point where they would be needing to work on the extension. And in order to keep that work going, I thought we had the information necessary. In addition, the other piece of information that played into my desire to give this consideration for the rest of council, and if council desires, we can table it at this point. That's a possibility. But in order to have the discussion, we needed to get to this point. I asked a question of our city engineer about the cost, kind of ballparking a cost of doing this on our own. And he, I admit it's a little bit of an unfair question because he's asked us off the cuff, and he says it's about $1.5 million to do this. And yet we're being asked to pay $460,000 because Mr. Kent's project is already working, and for the reasons he said. This has been on our capital plan for many a year. The opportunity to get a $1.5 million water line for $460,000 is in front of us. I say let's give it consideration.
Ms. Frishy.
So, three things. This went to water and sewer. It had little discussion, went to appropriations. It had fantastic discussion. And when I left that meeting, there were three things that were asked of our engineer. One was to find out what the cost would be in the interest of Whirlpool to tap into that project. That could lessen the cost of it. We don't have that. The material breakout, we don't have that, which according to Jeremy will never appear. And then part three was knowing full well what One Energy's intention was to do with the rest of their property with developing it, if they wanted to improve their property for further development, or they were just worried about their one building, which they came back saying they were just worried about their one building. So, Mr. Monday, I don't feel that the request of what was asked, appropriation asked for, was fulfilled in order to suspend the rules. And when Mr. Russell, who sits on appropriations, is using a $1.5 million project for $450,000, again, it's not apples to apples, because we would not be extending infrastructure into the county if there wasn't something going in like One Energy or another business, and they would be participating and paying for it, just like if a Whirlpool were to tap in to do their loop, they would be paying for that. So we don't have our answers. I'm confused on that, and I may have asked a dozen questions tonight, which is just my job and my prerogative, but I'm at a loss for words just to speed up a project that One Energy took it upon themselves to start. They knew what they were getting into, and if we don't have our answers, how are you able to make an educated vote?
Mr. Wobser.
I'll just state what I stated back in appropriations when I brought this up the first time, was that in a year where we're running a budget deficit, we have an opportunity to potentially look at a different way of running this, running these numbers, which would be to pay Mr. Kent back for his outlay of the outlay of cash to do this project above and beyond what he needs beyond his 8-inch line when the property is indeed developed. When it's developed, we'll pay him back. If it's 3 properties, we'll give him a third back every time one of them is developed and somebody else comes in and starts using the water. That was my suggestion then. You're right. I don't think we've had all the questions answered yet, and I'm a little surprised that we're pushing this through as fast as we are.
Mr. Russell.
Ms. Rishi, when you say that we don't have the answers, you're speaking on my behalf, and that is incorrect. I have the answers that I need in order to make a motion to suspend rules, to vote on that motion, and in order to vote on this ordinance. So I have the information I needed, and evidently 8 other council representatives had their information that they needed to suspend rules. So
Can you share Can you share the answer to those 3 questions that appropriation asked
Ms.
for?
Frishy,
So
please allow him to speak.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Ms. Frishy.
I would like to know the answers to those 3 questions that appropriations asked for in their committee meeting. If Mr. Grant Russell has them, please provide them to me, and I would be glad to vote.
Huh? Do you have the question? Mr. Harrington.
I call for the question.
All those in favor of voting for this ordinance say aye after name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Yes.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Mr. Watson.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Nay.
Ms. Frishy.
Nay.
Mr. Harrington.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Klein.
Aye.
Mr. Monday.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.